Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, October 12th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. President Biden wants military aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. So the White House has conveyed to members of Congress that it will request an emergency supplemental funding package that will include military aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, as well as additional funding for border security. This was reported by NBC News on Wednesday. So Biden administration officials said that the request will also include funds to manufacture weapons to replace what is being sent overseas. As we know, the U.S. has been sending a lot of stuff to Ukraine. The biggest shortage that they're dealing with is the 155 millimeter artillery shells, but there's other things as well, I'm sure, that they're running low on. So this is just, such a boon for the defense industry in the U.S., for the weapons makers. Now they're going to be sending a lot of stuff to Israel, as well as, Taiwan will probably be the least amount of money that they request. But still, they're really trying to arm Taiwan to the teeth, and military aid is part of it now. So the Washington Post first reported on Monday that the White House planned to link aid for Ukraine and Israel in an effort to jam the far right, which was how the Washington Post put it. And what they're referring to there is the House Republicans who are against the proxy war in Ukraine, but are staunch Israel supporters. So another thing a lot of those Republicans have in common is that they might be against arming Ukraine. They want to arm Israel, and they also want to arm Taiwan, for the most part. So some Republicans have apparently expressed opposition to linking Ukraine and Israel aid, even those who support sending weapons to both countries. Politico had a story about this, about some Republicans saying that they weren't really too keen on the idea. They quoted Representative Don Bacon, a Republican from Nebraska. He said, quote, "I support both, but I think it'd be a mistake to bundle the two. But it sounds like the administration wants to put the two together. I think that'd be a mistake," end quote. And it turns out they want to actually put three together. And I read a quote from Michael McCaul the other day. He's the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's a Republican. Super hawk, he's all in on the Ukraine proxy war. But he said the other day that he was hoping for something that includes Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. So the Republican leadership, I think, supports this. So we'll see what happens in the coming days. I think the request might be made as early as Thursday. So we don't know what the number is going to be, what the size of this spending package that the Biden administration is going to request. Biden previously asked for an additional $24 billion to fund the war in Ukraine, but that was never approved by Congress. There was that report recently from The Telegraph that said the Biden administration has been discussing the idea of a full year spending package for Ukraine to get through the 2024 elections, because they're worried the opposition is going to grow. And that could be as large as $100 billion. And this is an idea that is popular among hawks in the Senate as well. So we'll see what the number is. When it comes to Israel, I really have no idea. I mean, I remember after the 2021 Gaza bombing campaign, the last real major flare-up in Gaza, the U.S. gave Israel an extra $1 billion for that. And this is already much, much, much bigger than that. So we might see, I don't know, them spend a few billion on this on top of the $3.8 billion that Israel gets every year. So the House is not going to take up any new legislation until it gets a new speaker, which appears to be imminent. So Representative Steve Scalise, he has won the GOP nomination to be the speaker, and a full House vote to confirm Scalise is expected to happen soon. It'll probably happen on Thursday. And, he's been pretty bad on Ukraine. So, I don't know. We'll see, because the challenge for the Biden administration has been getting the Ukraine aid to the floor of the House for a vote. If it gets to the floor, it will pass. But now I feel like a lot of Republicans that might have opposed it before are now just like, I don't know, might go along with it because the Israel stuff is in there. So we'll see what happens. All right, so the next one here, Gaza's only power plant is out of fuel as airstrikes pound the Enclave. So the situation in Gaza is pretty bad. Gaza's only power plant was shut down on Wednesday after it ran out of fuel as the situation in the besieged Enclave is becoming increasingly desperate for civilians after days of relentless Israeli airstrikes. So at least 1,100 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza and 5,339 have been wounded since Hamas launched its attack on southern Israel. So according to Israeli officials as well, the bodies of 1,500 Hamas militants have been found inside Israel. That death toll is not confirmed. So it does appear that there's two different death tolls here and that the 1,100 is the Palestinians that have been killed in Gaza by Israeli airstrikes. And the Israelis are saying 1,500 Hamas militants were killed when they attacked Israel. Seems pretty high because the numbers that I saw was that 1,000 went in. But so that's not clear if that's confirmed, but it was kind of tricky to figure this out, but it looks like the total, Palestinian death toll and all this, if you include the Hamas guys that attacked Israel and everybody that's been killed in Gaza, is over 2,000. So that's what it seems to be. I think it'll become clear in the coming days, but so far we know at least 1,100 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, and that's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. And violence has also spiked in the West Bank, where at least 29 Palestinians have been killed since Saturday. So on the Israeli side, at least 1,200 people have been killed and 3,007 wounded. It's estimated that Hamas captured about 150 people in Israel that have been brought back into Gaza in an apparent effort to gain leverage for negotiations. Doesn't seem like any negotiations are happening. So Gaza has been under blockade since 2007, but it was put under a complete siege this week, meaning no food, fuel, medicine, or water can enter the territory. And the only way out for Gazans is the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. That's been closed after airstrikes hit nearby. Israel has also threatened to bomb aid trucks entering from Egypt. So it's a very desperate, dire situation in Gaza. Gaza hospitals are overwhelmed with people injured from airstrikes and will soon run out of fuel for their generators. A Gaza-based Doctors Without Borders official said that Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, only has enough fuel for 3 more days for its generators. So a surgeon at this hospital told AP that the hospital was also running out of other vital supplies, saying that they were beyond the capacity to cope, and that Gaza's health system only has the rest of this week before it collapses, not just because of the lack of fuel, but all supplies are running short. So this death toll is going to continue to climb pretty rapidly, it seems like. And Israel has mobilized 300,000 reservists and is expected to launch a ground invasion of Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated places on the planet. And it's home to over 2 million people, half of them being children, about half. According to Middle East Eye, I saw this on one of their updates, about 1/3 of the 1,100 people that have been killed in Gaza so far have been children. That's not confirmed. The real number of how many children have been killed, we don't know yet. But I did see Al Jazeera reported earlier when the death toll was around 900 that the Palestinian Health Ministry was saying about 260 kids were among the 900, which is almost 1/3. So it might not be that far off. So just a really horrific situation in Gaza. And you have people in the U.S., cheering this on. The U.S. is strongly backing Israel's onslaught. And according to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, the U.S. is not setting any red lines. When he was asked if, the U.S. was setting any kind of red lines, Sullivan said, quote, "I'm not here to draw red lines or issue warnings or give lectures to anybody," end quote. The lectures are just for, the other countries that the U.S. doesn't like. But when it comes to an ally bombing, civilian populated areas, no lectures needed. All right, the next one here. Senator Lindsey Graham says we're in a religious war, and he calls to level Gaza. So he said this on Tuesday. This was in an appearance on Fox News. He declared that, he said we're in a religious war, and he said they need to level the Gaza Strip. This is one of those things. It's just so insane. And when I first heard about it, I was like, let me go make sure, that this is real, that he really said something so insane. And then I saw on his Twitter, he tweeted out a clip of it, a 7-second clip of him saying this quote. So I'll just read it. Quote, "We're in a religious war here. I am with Israel. Do whatever the hell you have to do to defend yourself. Level the place," end quote. So you see the reports coming out of Gaza. It's really horrific stuff. And these are the things that the hawkish U.S. politicians are saying. And of course, he's also called for bombing Iran in response to Hamas killing hostages, which they haven't killed any prisoners yet. But Graham said on Monday, quote, "For every Israeli or American hostage executed by Hamas, we should take down an Iranian oil refinery. The only way you're going to keep this war from escalating is to hold Iran accountable," end quote. So the only way to keep things from escalating is to bomb Iran, apparently, according to Lindsey Graham. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu and Gantz to form an emergency unity government. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and centrist opposition leader Benny Gantz, who was a defense minister under a previous government not that long ago when Netanyahu was prime minister. He was actually an alternative prime minister, but then there was elections before Gantz had his turn. But Netanyahu and Gantz agreed to form a war cabinet compromising of Netanyahu, Gantz, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And this was issued in a joint statement by Gantz's National Unity Party. The statement said that the unity government will not provide any unrelated policy or laws except those related to the ongoing fighting with Hamas and Gaza. So this is interesting because Gantz has become, I'm not sure how outspoken Gantz has been when it comes to the stuff with Netanyahu. I'm pretty sure he's been a real opponent of his. But I know Yair Lapid, who was also recently prime minister, his opposition party is the main opposition party. Gantz's is the second biggest in the Knesset, and he hasn't agreed yet to join this government. Apparently they've offered it to him, but this is just showing how Netanyahu is facing this political crisis, all these protests for this judicial overhaul, and now unity in the face of what's going on, and they're uniting to destroy Gaza. It's kind of benefiting Netanyahu politically in a way so far. Depends how disastrous everything turns out. I mean, I don't know enough about internal Israeli politics to say, the raid and the amount of Israelis that were killed might already hurt Netanyahu pretty good. But if things, if there's a disastrous invasion or something, that can hurt him as well. All right, so the next one here, we just have the live updates from Middle East Eye that we keep up here. The death toll is still about the same, and this is the death toll from early Wednesday morning in Israel and Gaza. So the next one here, U.S. intelligence shows Iran surprised by Hamas attack. So the New York Times reported on Wednesday that U.S. intelligence shows Iranian leaders were surprised by the Hamas attack on southern Israel and that no evidence has been found indicating Iran helped plan the operation. So this report reads, quote, "These key Iranian officials did not know the attack was coming, according to the intelligence. The United States, Israel, and key regional allies have not found evidence that Iran directly helped plan the attack, according to the U.S. officials and another official in the Middle East," end quote. So this is interesting. It said that Morgan Muir, who's a deputy director of national intelligence, he told Congress in a briefing on Tuesday that there was no direct link between Iran and Hamas. Between Iran and the Hamas attack. He said that U.S. intelligence agencies had evidence contradicting assertions that Iran had helped plan the attack. And this came after that report from the Wall Street Journal on Sunday that claimed Iran helped plan the operation and gave Hamas the green light for the attack during a meeting in Beirut last week. But the Times report said that the U.S. and its allies track and monitor meetings between Quds Force leaders, the Iranian IRGC. The Quds Force is a branch of the IRGC. And it says that they track meetings between them and their proxies and allies, including Hamas, and that officials say there's no evidence that those meetings were used to plan the attack in Israel. So it seems like that Wall Street Journal report was just a total fake. Right after it was published as well, the Israeli military said that it had no evidence that Iran was involved. And both the U.S. officials speaking to the Times and the Israeli officials left open the possibility that Iran was responsible. And, there's always a chance that they do, they say that maybe they didn't find the evidence yet. What's interesting here is that, if they wanted to escalate things with Iran, they could just blame them. They accuse Iran of all sorts of things. But the fact that they're not doing that, I think, is a sign that they don't want to escalate this thing into a war with Iran. Of course, you have some hawks in the U.S. like Lindsey Graham that want to. But for the most part, it seems like the U.S. and Israel are not wanting that right now. I think they want to focus on this destruction of Gaza that's going on. So the next one here, Representative McCaul confirms Egypt warned Israel before Hamas attack. So McCaul, who's the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, he said on Wednesday that Egypt warned Israel of a potential attack 3 days before Hamas launched its incursion into southern Israel, confirming earlier reports. So McCaul said after a closed-door intelligence briefing, quote, "We know that Egypt has warned the Israelis 3 days prior that an event like this could happen. I don't want to get too much into classified, but a warning was given. I think the question was at what level," end quote. So if you remember, shortly after the Hamas attack was launched, an Egyptian official told AP that Cairo had given a warning that something was coming. And there was another report from Ynet that said Egypt's intelligence minister called Netanyahu just 10 days before the Hamas attack, saying that something unusual was going on. So what's interesting here is that, so McCall's saying just 3 days before Egypt issued some kind of warning. And the office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu strongly denied the reports that Egypt gave them any kind of warning the other day. So it's interesting to see now McCall come out and say this, that that's what the U.S. intelligence is saying. And of course, the big question is, how did Israel let this happen? How did they know that, not know that something was coming when Gaza's under blockade and constantly being surveilled? All right, so the next one here, how a secretive Hamas commander mastermind attack on Israel. So this is an interesting article from Reuters, and it talks about the leader of Hamas's military wing, Mohammed Daif, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, about how he planned the attacks. Really what's interesting is the day of the attack, there was an audio tape broadcast of him, and he's, the most wanted man in Gaza. Israel's tried to assassinate him, so he's a very shadowy figure. People don't really see him too often, but there was a recording of his voice on that day, and that's when people in Gaza realized that something was happening, that something big was happening, because people that weren't in Hamas were not aware of what was about to explode. And Reuters talks to people, sources that they say are close to Hamas, and they talk about the motive for the attack. And a big part of it, as Hamas has said, was the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this started, it was really bad in 2021 when Israeli forces went in there and were beating people and dragging them out. And apparently that's when he started planning this attack. So it's been in the works for a very long time, according to this source. So the source said, quote, "It was triggered by scenes and footage of Israel storming Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, beating worshipers, attacking them, dragging elderly and young men out of the mosque. All this fueled and ignited the anger," end quote. And then, of course, there's other things, provocations from Israel and the West Bank that have been going on. So the recording, I'll just read one line from the recording that went out on Saturday in Gaza. He said, quote, "Today, the rage of Al-Aqsa, the rage of our people and nation is exploding. Our mujahideen, today is your day to make this criminal understand that his time has ended," end quote. So just thought that was worth, posting so people see, the motive. What Hamas is saying was their motive for this attack, and they called it Al-Aqsa Flood, the operation. The next one here, unverified reports of Hamas beheading babies filled front pages. So I don't know, you guys might have heard on Tuesday there was a story going around that 40 babies were beheaded by Hamas, and it turned out to be a completely unverified claim that was initially made by Israel's I-24 News. And it spread like wildfire. Newspaper headlines were all over the UK. And what's really something is that President Biden, so I might write something about this. It's still kind of developing, but I saw Trita Parsi tweeted this out he's from the Quincy Institute. So President Biden on Wednesday night, he said something about this story about Hamas beheading babies or killing or beheading children. And the White House walked it back. So apparently Biden said at the White House, quote, "I've been doing this a long time. I never really thought that I would have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children," end quote. So a White House spokesperson later clarified that U.S. officials and the president have not seen pictures or confirmed such reports independently. The president based his comments about the alleged atrocities on the claims from Netanyahu's spokesman and media reports from Israel, according to the White House. In response to questions from the Post, the Israeli Defense Forces declined to comment on the state of victims' bodies. So it was this thing that just really spread, and it added to the calls for, genocide in Gaza, which is what many people are calling for. All right, so the next one here, a new $200 million arms package for Ukraine. So the U.S. on Wednesday announced a $200 million arms package for Ukraine that includes HIMARS ammunition, artillery shells, anti-tank weapons, and other equipment. The package was announced as Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was in Brussels hosting a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which is a gathering that includes military leaders from about 50 countries. For the first time, Zelensky attended the meeting. This is something Austin has been hosting throughout the war. And at this meeting, Austin insisted that the U.S. could keep fueling the proxy war in Ukraine while also sending more military aid to Israel as it's expected to invade Gaza. He said that the U.S. can do both and will do both. Zelensky expressed concern about the situation in Israel and Gaza diverting attention from Ukraine, saying, quote, "Of course, everybody's afraid, and I think also Russia's counting on it, on dividing support," end quote. So Wednesday also marked the first time that General Charles Q. Brown, who's the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he replaced Mark Milley. So he's the highest-ranking officer in the U.S. military. But this was the first time he attended this Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting. So according to the Pentagon, the new arms package includes the AIM-9M missiles for air defense, counter-unmanned aerial systems, HIMARS ammunition, 155 and 105 millimeter artillery rounds, precision aerial munitions, electronic warfare equipment, TOW missiles, AT-4 anti-armor systems, small arms, demolition munitions, spare parts, training, and things like that. So more for Ukraine, and this is coming from the billions that became available by the Pentagon accounting error that was very, very conveniently freed up about $6 billion that the U.S. could use to keep fueling this war. And that's about all they have left right now before Congress passes new authorization. But they have about, as far as I understand, about $5 billion left. So they could keep sending Ukraine weapons for a little while. The next one here, Zelensky asks Netanyahu if he can visit Israel. He wants to get in on the action, I guess. So this article is from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. Zelensky sent a request to Tel Aviv to coordinate a trip to Israel in a show of support. The White House is trying to unify the wars in Israel and Ukraine by pushing a spending bill, as I covered, that covers both of them, as well as Taiwan. So on Wednesday, Axios spoke with Israeli and Ukrainian officials who confirmed Zelensky's request to go visit Israel. So it's not clear yet if he's going to make the visit, but he wants to go show support. And Zelensky has given Israel a hard time for not giving them weapons that they wanted. Israel stayed relatively neutral. They gave them some support. I think they sold them, or second-handedly gave them some sort of electronic warfare system, like drone jamming system. But as far as I know, I don't think they've really sent them any weapons. The U.S. has sent artillery shells that they have a stockpile of in Israel to Ukraine. So Israel did let that happen. But all right, so the last story here, U.S. formally labels the Niger uprising a coup. So this article is from Connor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute. Washington formally declared the July 26th ouster of Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum a coup d'etat. So the junta, called the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, is led by General Abdurrahman Chiani. And per U.S. law, this designation means that the U.S. will indefinitely cut off military assistance, including counterterrorism and training missions. Senior White House officials told reporters the decision comes after Washington had exhausted all other options to preserve the constitutional order in the West African nation. So it says that any resumption of U.S. assistance will require action. The U.S. has suspended all drone flights. Oh, no, sorry. They suspended all drone flights in the aftermath of the coup, but they resumed intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance flights. So the U.S. has this big drone base in Niger, Air Base 101. So this is interesting that they labeled it as a coup, because there were some reports that said the U.S. might work with the junta so they can maintain their military presence in Niger. And there's also reports that said they might issue a waiver. If they do issue the formal coup declaration, they might issue a waiver so they could still keep giving them military assistance. So we'll see what this means if this leads to the U.S. leaving Niger, or if they figure out a way that they can stay. And also, Connor also mentioned in this article that France started to begin their withdrawal from Niger. I think there's still the chance of war here, but it's way less than it seemed like it was earlier. In the wake of the coup, I thought things were going to get pretty bad, but it looks like you got the French leaving, and now maybe the U.S. This might lead to the U.S. leaving, which is kind of the best case scenario for us. All right, that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Jonathan Cook. The blood of Gaza is on the West's hands as much as Israel's. One from Ted Snyder. Putin's Valdai speech, what you need to know. One from Dan Perry. The new Gaza war on Israel highlights a false conception. One from Haaretz. This is an article from the editorial board of the Israeli paper Haaretz, and it says that an Israel-Hamas prisoner exchange is needed now. One from Brian McGlinchey. Israel fostered the rise of Hamas even after it turned to terrorism. And he makes, this is something Scott Horton's been pointing out a lot since all of this stuff has been going down, is how you've had Netanyahu and other Israeli officials say that Hamas was a benefit to Israel because them being, the ruling party in Gaza, that means that they could isolate Gaza, and the U.S. won't support them because they consider Hamas a terrorist organization, and they could use Hamas as a pretext to destroy Gaza or do what they want, isolate them as much as possible, essentially. But that is it for everything, the news and the viewpoints. You could go check out our blog. We got a lot of good stuff in there as well. You could always help me out by sharing this show, commenting, subscribing wherever you watch. If you listen to the audio version, you could leave a rating or a review where you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. That's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.